Hello, everybody. My name is Alvin Kamshum. I too am one of the steering committee member for the PTPT conference, and I live with chronic persistent pain as all the members of our committee. I am joining you today from Edmonton, Alberta, located within Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homeland and Métis nations of Alberta Region 4. We acknowledge that this is a traditional territory of many First Nations, such as the Cree, the Dene, the Stoney, the Saulteaux, and the Blackfoot. I am indeed grateful to live, work, connect, and grow on this land. I am truly delighted to welcome you all to today's opening session on peer support research and real-world evidence with Paul Gill, Dr. Susan Holtzman, and Janet Patterson. This session will discuss the living experiences of peer support facilitators and research investigating the impact of peer support on people living with pain with a focus on online support. We really appreciate everyone for being here with us today. Please engage with our panelists by sending your questions in the Q&A function, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the presentations. As a peer support facilitator myself, I would like to start by briefly defining what peer support is. According to the Ontario Peer Development Initiative, peer support is a naturally occurring, mutually beneficial support process where people who share a common experience meet as equals, sharing skills, trends, and hope, learning from each other how to cope, thrive, and flourish. And I would like to add that peer support can appear in different formats. It can be formal or informal. It can be a one-on-one setting or a group setting. It can be in person or online. Now, with that said, please help me welcome our speakers for today, Paul Gill, Dr. Susan Holtzman, and Janet Patterson. I will let each of you introduce yourself and share your experiences, your expertise, and insight with us. What would happen in this case is Paul will go first, followed by Susan, and finally, Janet. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Gill, and I'd like to start off by acknowledging that I live and play on the unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And just a little quick bit about myself. I've been working as a longshoreman for the past 10 years here, here on the west coast of British Columbia. And I've been involved with the labor movement through the Young Workers and organizing and stuff like that. And then I've started volunteering as a support and wellness worker for Pain BC as a facilitator for the support and wellness groups since last March. And I like to kind of talk about my conceptualization of peer support, what I've seen, what it means, and kind of like where I'd like to see it go. And to start off, I think for myself that peer support at its root is about connection and as another light in the dark as we navigate through life. And at its core, to me, peer support says, I'm here, I've been here, you're not alone as you navigate life. So pain, any sort of illness, be it mental or physical, things like addiction, or most negative life experiences can somehow distort our realities and have us feeling alone. And peer support is the type of help that dispels that loneliness. So we're not, doctors, surgeons, medical professionals in that regard, but as peer support workers, we kind of lend a helping hand based on our own lived experience. And I'd like to share a story that kind of sums that up. There's a story about a man walking down the street who fell into a hole. It was too steep to climb out of. And, he cried for help, and eventually, realized he couldn't get out. And so a doctor walked by and he yelled for help. The doctor wrote a prescription, threw it into the hole. Cried for help. And a priest walked by and the priest wrote a prayer, handed him a Bible, and continued walking. And eventually the man saw his friend walk by and he asked for help, and the friend jumps into the hole. And the man says, "What are you doing now? We're both stuck." And the man says, "Yeah, but I've been here before. I know the way out. I can help you." And for me, peer support was, I've been here before and I know the way out and I can help you, or I can sit with you. So I started as a facilitator for the pain support and wellness groups. And I saw that the most important thing it gave people was a sense of community. It took away the loneliness of their pain and gave them a community where they could talk. And it was sort of a bi-directional relationship between the group and everyone involved. Everyone was pouring into others' cups, being helped, sharing stories. And I saw this help by, validating experiences. One of my favorite things to hear is when someone says, I don't know if this makes sense to anyone else. I don't know if anyone else is going through this. And it's always met with a nod of, yes, we all are. And maybe it's shame, stigma, loneliness that gets kind of taken away. And I find this even in life in general, where, when you have a friend or a loved one kind of say, like, hey, this is a little weird, but I don't know if anyone else does this. And as soon as you hit them with, yeah, that's actually a lot more common than you think, you just kind of, you get that deep breath. And it was a way of seeing how others are navigating similar obstacles or have navigated these similar obstacles. And, I've seen it at a smaller scale. I've seen it help people in my own life. There was someone in my life, going through a really bad pain flare up and really struggling, and just to hear it in their voice of, I don't know what to do. And I'm going to, the catastrophization that happened, and, jumping around, and just overnight, I saw things change when, I got a call and said, hey, I don't feel so bad anymore. I ran into someone who went through the same thing I did. And just to hear the hope in their voice, and like, I know what to do, and like I have someone ask for help, and I can follow what happened to them. And even if it happens again, there's someone to share with. And for me, that's kind of at the root of peer support. You don't have to struggle with something alone. And if, people can use your lived experience, not only for those who have struggled or gone through things, or sorry, who are, in the thick of it right now, it's also for those to make sense of, their suffering, or a way to give back, or a way to forge these connections. And what's kind of next for me, or what I'd like to see in peer support, is this extend to other, less formal areas or styles of peer support. I mean, I'd love to see connections in areas that, I'm a part of, men in general, or men in the trades. If peer support to me is just another form of community or support or organization, but peer support can't really happen in the dark. You have to share your story, and there's stigma depending on what story you're sharing, how much you want to share with people. So in a sense, peer support doesn't happen in the dark. You also can't out people. You can't, if people don't want to share parts of their stories. So I'm wondering, what areas we can have, what faculties we have to facilitate peer support, or how we can train, people to provide peer support to people. And I've seen it work so well, and I'm a big fan of it. And it's often one of those things where you're like, well, how can this help? It's almost like you're just talking, but it's what you're talking about, who you're talking with, who you're validating. And I'd love to see this continue. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'd like to pass the mic on to Susan now.
Susan, you'll just need to put your video on, please.
Hi, just getting my slides all ready. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, it's good.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul. That was wonderful. Really looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm so happy to be here. My name is Susan Holzman. I'm a faculty member in psychology at UBC's Okanagan campus, which sits on the unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. I've been doing research on social relationships in the context of chronic pain for almost 25 years now, actually. But the work that I'm going to be sharing with you today could not have been done without the support of my graduate students in my lab, especially Sage and Carolyn. A lot of this has been done in collaboration with Pain BC, in particular Melanie and Carmel, as well as the Bill Nelms Pain and Research Center here in Kelowna. So I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to try to answer three what I think are important questions when it comes to peer support for pain. The first is just trying to understand whether people living with pain are satisfied with the peer support that they have. We'll consider some of the possible outcomes for taking part in an online peer support group for pain. And then lastly, talk about some of the barriers. And I think Paul already started to allude to some of these. And so we'll tease that apart a little bit too. So to tackle this first question, I'm going to share with you just one of the results of a larger survey that we conducted recently in the Bill Nelms Pain and Research Center. This is a very large pain specialty clinic here in Kelowna. And we did an online survey of people in the clinic, and almost 1,000 people answered this question about peer support. And what we found is less than a third of people indicated they felt satisfied or very satisfied with the peer support that they have for their pain. So clearly we're tapping into this unmet need for support here. So if you have or are thinking about taking part in a more formal peer support group like we're talking about here, I wanted to share with you some of the early results of a study that we're doing with Pain BC, looking at the long-term outcomes of participating and engaging in an online peer-delivered peer support group. And so we're happy to answer more questions about what these groups look like, but just generally speaking, these are free. They happen all over, they're online, but they are offered in certain areas geographically across the province, as well as we have some population-specific groups that I'll tell you a little bit about as well. The sessions last about 2 hours. There's a chance to share experiences, learn self-management tools, do some mindful relaxation as well together as a group. And one of the real gaps in the research in this area is really looking over time at what the impact is. And so what we did is we designed this survey that participants could fill out sort of at the baseline time point, and then we follow them up every 3 months. So we're very lucky to have had 67 support group participants engage with our study. A larger proportion are women. The average age was 51, but we had a really nice age range here, all the way from 25 to 75. The majority weren't working under paid employment circumstances, and the most common diagnoses in this group in particular were fibromyalgia, arthritis, and migraine, but there was a wide range of different health conditions people are living with. Here's a map of where participants were most likely to participate in terms of the online group. As I mentioned, people are free to join any group they wish. People often tend to choose the location that's closest to where they reside. But you can see a larger proportion on the coast there, 24% on the island, and so on. And as I mentioned, we also captured some of the early participants in these specific groups, a young adult group, and also a group for LGBTQ2S+. And since then, also we have a BIPOC group, as well as some language-specific groups in Punjabi and Mandarin. So always expanding and shifting to the needs of people in our province. First, I'll share with you just some general satisfaction with the group experience from the perspective of the participants themselves. 98% feel respected by group facilitators, 89% reported feeling supported by group members. Again, as Paul was mentioning, a large proportion are feeling a really strong sense of community with other members. And also, you know, it's not just sharing experiences, but also learning tools, concrete tools for managing pain. These numbers don't necessarily capture it. I think these descriptions and the stories do a bit of a better job. So I'll share with you a couple of quotes here. One, by feeling the common understanding and experience of the group, I finally feel some hope. Very powerful words. Feel less alone and isolated when sharing common experiences. So these are the words that we're hearing from people that are engaging in these groups. And engaging, I should say, doesn't necessarily mean actively participating. You know, it could just be sitting and listening, and that in itself can be very felt, you know, in terms of very powerful and supportive. So looking at the numbers, we wanted to see, are things changing in terms of people's health and well-being and function? So I'll share with you the results of our 3-month follow-up. We'll be done collecting all our data by the end of the year here, and we'll be able to share more long-term follow-up in the new year. But so far, we are actually seeing substantial, significant improvements in people's pain, as well as sleep. We're also seeing evidence, somewhat more tentative, and we'll have to see what happens as we continue to follow people. Not surprisingly, less loneliness, feeling like pain is interfering less in one's daily life, and greater just general participation in daily activities. But of course, it's not easy for a lot of reasons to necessarily engage in this type of support. And so I'm going to share with you some common barriers that we've seen in our research, both from the research we've done through Pain BC, but also through that larger survey that I mentioned earlier at the Bill Nellum's clinic here in Kelowna. So by far, the most common barrier that was noted is actually time. You know, people are busy. People have busy lives. And so a lack of time, or perceived lack of time, logistics, scheduling conflicts, and so on come up, even though there are groups offered at different times of day and it is online. Even despite that, it still can be a challenge. A lot of people expressed hesitation in sharing what they've experienced as something very personal, particularly with a group of people that they don't know, or don't know yet, I should say. And ironically, right, some of the main reasons people may need that support is the pain and is the fatigue that comes along with living with persistent pain. But of course, those experiences can then make it difficult to feel up to engaging with a group such as this, or on a regular basis. So we can talk about how to address this as well. And then lastly, less commonly, but this did come up, is some people shared that in the past they had negative group experiences that made them feel a bit more hesitant to try this type of support again. For example, certain people taking up more space in the room, or Zoom room, as it were, or negativity and so on. So I want to address that, because I think that is a common reason why people maybe have a negative connotation with support groups, even though that may not be reflected in the actual experience as well. Okay, so putting this all together, there clearly is an unmet need for peer support for pain. The research in this area is still quite limited, and our study has shown great promise for peer support groups for improving health and a sense of community. There was a recent review published actually just a few months ago, kind of in line with what we found here. So what we're finding is consistent with what others are finding in adult populations. There's also some groups in Ontario, Jennifer Stinson's group at Sick Kids, and Dr. McMurtry at University of Guelph are looking at this in the context of more youth, for example, where there's also a great need and a potential for support. And lastly, I think we've already started talking about this, is peer support doesn't have to look like this formal support group. It can take many forms. It's not for everybody, but we are seeing some barriers that I think we'll address as a group today, and love to hear everyone's thoughts on that as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my slides here and pass it on to Janet. Thanks.
Janet, if you turn your video on, I can spotlight you. There we go.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Janet Patterson, and I live in Thunder Bay, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. I come as an injured worker who has experienced significant workplace injuries and who got involved with peer support and I found that it really made a difference. But I'm going to just start off. I was about 27 when I first had a bad injury at work. And it took 15 months before I was finally put in the hospital. And they said, well, it's going to be 2 days or 2 months. And it was 2 months that my back was broken. And so I had fusion in that. And I was fortunate in that over time, I was able to recover well enough that I was able to get back to most of my activities of life. In 97, I got jumped. So 10 years later, I was jumped at work, and that resulted in just a very pain, and everything was impacted. And it was in this journey, this time, I met up with the Thunder Bay District Injured Worker Support Group. And they'd been around already at that time for probably 15 years or so. So they were well established, but they had a lot of things going on. They were working, very busy group. Anyway, they had a peer support program. So I attended it, and it made such a difference for me because I had found I wasn't able to go back to work, and I was off the last time too when I broke my back. And you go through so many things. You lose control of so many things in your life, and that is such a big struggle because you don't have the things that we take for granted. We no longer have any control over, and you'll end up losing so much, and you feel alone. You don't realize that there are other people involved that are going through similar things. But through the peer support program, I learned, and I met a lot of, because at that time we were doing they were in-person meetings, and we had probably about 20, 25 people come out. We did a monthly meeting, and it was really something to see, because with injured workers, typically we don't see the people who have an injury where they're impacted by, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months. By and large, thankfully, we're really happy that they recovered and they were able to get back to their life. But those that we see in the peer support groups are the ones who do not recover. They are not able to get back to a lot of their parts of life. They suffer the losses and everything. But it's really comforting to know that they really understand what you're going through. We don't all have the same circumstances. We don't have the same injuries. The commonalities are not there, but it's the losses, the struggles. Those are the things that are the commonalities, and that you can really draw from each other. Oh, I went through something similar. This is what I did. And you can share those kind of things. And it is so helpful. So I continued on with peer support, and our group actually, we were part of a group that created a peer support program. And for the injured workers, it was actually in specific an injured worker peer support program. So I got involved with the training with that. And then there was also a peer support training program for people. Just you didn't have to be especially identified with the injured workers, and that led me to do a training program. Northwestern Ontario, back about 15 years ago, we suffered our mining was shutting down, our forestry was shutting down. Workers were just massively unemployed. And a lot of the workers we found, even through the injured workers, when they come into the office, a lot of them, they go into those things and they do extremely well, but they didn't do great in school. So there might be language barriers, there's learning barriers, and so a lot of different things. But these workers were now unemployed and they were, what comes next? So the government of government of Canada, federal, sorry, they set up labor action centers in all these communities all around Northwestern Ontario. And we had to go travel, myself and my mentor, I worked with him for a number of years, Bart Pilato, and he was just amazing to work with. He was so insightful, such a genuine, real person. Like, it was just a gift to be able to tag along with him and learn. But we traveled all over Northwestern Ontario and we did the train the trainer sessions. And it was an amazing opportunity because you meet so many people, you get to get the feel for what's going on in all the communities, because again, it's different things. It might be different industry. There's commonalities in these little communities, lack of big jobs for one thing, the paying jobs and everything, but their common core is, of course, is they're displaced workers now and what comes next. And a lot of them were, some of them just entering the workforce and some of them had been getting ready to exit the workforce. So what comes? So I really think the peer support is vital, as Paul mentioned about, like, even within the trades, having the peer support, the ability to talk with one another through whatever the commonality is, but to talk, to really listen and to understand, it is an important thing. And when you're living chronic pain, it's so deeply personal, but at the same time, what you can get from another person, the isolation, the loneliness, I'm just, nobody else is going through what I'm going through, all these different things, it makes a difference in your life when you do realize that you are not alone on it, and that there is help to be had, and peer support is a great way. I work part-time in the office of the Canadian Injured Workers Alliance, and I can't tell you how many times I've had a phone call from an injured worker because they just see injured workers and they think, oh, I can get help. And I don't mind at all getting these calls, but 9 out of 10 of them will say, thank you so much for listening to me. Nobody has done this for me before, and I feel so much better. And at the end of the day, that is something that peer support, whether it is done in a one-on-one, whether it's done in a formal circle, it is truly helpful. And don't give up because you try one peer support way of doing it. You know what, you might find that doesn't work for you all. Or it might be just one person who's kind of got their own mission and they're controlling things their own way. And, that might not work, but there are lots of peer support groups on, and find out, like, if it's not peer support through one way, it might be just a matter of connecting with a different sided group of it, or being involved with more than one. But the benefits of peer support are truly an amazing gift that when you connect with them. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet, Paul, and Suzanne. Oh my goodness. Whew. I feel like I need to take a deep breath because peer support is very, very dear to me. And you all shared so many wonderful things. I know one of your last statements, Janet, was don't give up because you tried one group and it did not work for you. And that is true, because from my own personal experience, I started off with more than one group, and then I settled for what worked best for me. I know this came up more than once. I think Susan talked about this, and Paul also mentioned. So I have a question for you all. What are your thoughts on how you can address these barriers? Because barriers was something that came up, and or misconceptions that people might have about peer support or support groups. So Paul, how would you like to go first?
One of the biggest misconceptions that I see is perhaps people not understanding what a peer support group is. We've had people hop into groups and either very quickly or, a little bit into the group say, yeah, this is not what I thought it was. This group is not for me. This is what I thought it was. And it kind of begs a question of, maybe asking beforehand or make it a little more clear, like what is peer support and what is not peer support. But then again, like Janet just mentioned, like, not giving up. You've tried one method of peer support. Our groups at Pain BC are quite different in all their own regards. You got AM groups, PM groups, you got groups in different areas. And a lot of these groups have a different vibe, different, form, flow, style of communication. And one might fit with people and one might completely turn some other people off. And Susan also mentioned a lot of, stuff about fatigue, adding to pain. It's hard to ask people who might, be in the thick of it or struggling to jump around, shop around when sometimes it is kind of an emergency. We need acute treatment. So, Shannon, do you have thoughts about that?
I think that one of the things with the peer support, I think communication is so really important. We have had, we actually, and again, my focus is coming from the injured worker side of things, but we have a Tuesday session, which is advocacy, it's peer support, it's education, it's kind of a melding of everything. But we've had a fellow join us, and I mean, we're through the Ontario, because we're in the Ontario WSIB, but we're getting people from BC and from the East Coast and Alberta joining us. But we had a fellow join us from Alberta, and he said, like, I mean, he had given up. And like he was ready to just like I'm done. I'm ready to go to the WSIB, the compensation office, and just kill myself right there on their stairs. And it was like I was so amazed by how quickly the group pulled together. And we took the time, we let him talk, we talked back. So like it's not always easy, but it's really important not to be dismissive of anybody either, because you really don't know what's going on. I mean, of course, the number one thing it's always, when you do have circumstances like that, like like when we'd have them in our Thunder Bay office, and somebody would come in and, we'd get a hold of 911. So there's different ways to treat things, but you have to really have a sense of what they're saying too, and where your knowledge goes. Like, do you know of another way? It might mean a smaller group, or just figuring out what works. Thanks.
Susan, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I think, this is such a great discussion. It stands out to me that time is such a barrier, and it's not surprising to me. And I think, Paul, you sort of mentioned that as well, both you and Janet, that looking at different formats as well. 2 hours is quite a big commitment, especially if you're working, or if you just do have a high level of pain and fatigue, or the idea of 2 hours. It could be both, right? And I think part of the sell or the buy-in is also some of the feedback we heard in our survey too is, well, what's the point? How is this going to help me? And think with the pandemic, we've known for decades that social relationships are important for our health, and that when you're lonely, that's just as much of a risk factor for early mortality and poor health as things like poor physical activity and so on, things like that. And so just growing the awareness of the health benefits, and if you have been disbelieved and invalidated for years, you can kind of forget, or perhaps haven't really truly known that feeling of feeling validated and understood. And Janet, you mentioned that just the power of being listened to and validated, that in and of itself actually does have health benefits. It reduces stress. It makes us feel like we're worth it, and that it's worth pushing through and continuing to find ways to manage and connect. And we found that a lot of people in the pain clinic here aren't even aware that there are these groups out there. So just actually increasing awareness in the general community, pain is so common. We're really, again, these groups are not necessarily for everybody, but there are so many people out there living with pain, and because it's invisible, we don't see that every day, but it is there. And so I think even just spreading that awareness of the benefit, but even just that these groups exist, that not everybody knows they're out there.
Oh,
Sure.
thank you. See, Susan, you briefly touched on something, loneliness, and how badly it can impact our health. And I can't agree any. I keep telling people loneliness is not the absence of people in your life. Loneliness is the absence of genuine connection and trust. Because I suffered with loneliness for so long before I found my peer support group. And it's so true. Being in a setting where people validate your pain, your experience, you feel like you're being heard. I remember how it made me feel when I heard someone say, me too. You know, being a young person and having all these complaints, sometimes people who don't understand and feel like you're weird or you're making all this up. But being in a support group and hear people say, oh, Alvin, me too, it felt so good. And I know it doesn't always go the way we want it to go, but just like Janet said, don't give up. And you don't exactly have to settle for just one group. You can try a couple of groups and see what works best for you. The benefits of peer support, we cannot emphasize enough on them, but I am really hoping we can take time and just learn. And yeah, I thank you all so much. And how about we go to answer some questions, because yeah, attendees are engaged. There are so many questions for you all. So the first question is from Vanessa. She says, as a French person, I can integrate a peer support group. Can I integrate a peer support group in Canada? There is nothing in France concerning chronic pain, except Facebook, but it is not optimal experience. I really believe in the group to help. So you can tell she's French speaking. So basically she just says she believes peer support is important, but she doesn't have a peer support group in France. So just wondering if there are any peer support groups in Canada for French speaking people. I don't know if any of you have an answer, but I know in Canada we have Association Québécoise de Douleurs Chroniques.
Yes.
I
Yes.
just don't know if they are open to people outside Canada. I don't know. Any of you have an idea?
I don't.
So Vanessa, you might want to check out Association Québécoise de Douleurs Chroniques here in Canada. They are French speaking. They offer support groups in French. And then, yeah, you then will know if, you know, they are open to people outside Canada or not. Okay. Ooh, okay. Susan, this next question is for you. It says, hi, it's from Brian. He says, hi, Susan, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Who were the studying? Okay, you answered that. So next question. Have you provided services to veteran-specific peer support groups, specifically military or law enforcement?
We don't have a group affinity group for that yet, but I think as this grows and peer support grows and when the numbers are there, I believe that's also just like, the trades or men in the trades, that's a specific group with specific problems, a specific way of speech, dealing with things, a different culture. And that's also something that would need to be done.
Mhm.
Yes, I think that's on the near horizon. It's on our radar as well. I know there are a growing number of peer support groups for men in general. And I can share some names, but there is a greater focus on that. Dr. John Olaf at the UBC's Vancouver campus is very interested in men's health, for example, and men's specific groups. In the States, I know of peer support for veterans in pain, but in Canada, not off the top of my head.
Yeah. So Brian, oh no, this is from Mike. So yeah, like we said, we are hoping that in the nearest future we'll have more information on, veteran specific support groups. So yeah, thank you for that question. Next question is, I think peer support is helpful in many ways, but are there ever accounts of participants, that is people with living experience, feeling triggered or re-traumatized by hearing about others' pain experiences? Sometimes listening to others describe their symptoms can cause the listener to feel the symptoms themselves.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I had the recent experience actually. Someone had emailed our group and asked for somebody. So she'd been injured at work and was suffering injury and PTSD. And so she was asking for somebody to call her. So I called her and we were on the phone for probably at least an hour. But in the course of it, it was her story, and like we could have been interchangeable except 30 years earlier. We had all the same likes. Her trauma at work was the same as mine. And like it was just everything. And it just really, like it really hit me. And I was like so apologetic to her because I'm like, I am so sorry because I'm supposed to be helping you. But in the end, it turned out like as a great connection. But you really don't know what you're heading into. And I apologized profusely and I said, like I can connect you with somebody else. And she was like, no, not at all. Like you've helped me immensely. But it is really difficult to be caught in that. I found it very difficult anyway. But it also leads to the importance of your own self-care when doing peer support, because that's really important too. Because we get that even with our group meetings, and that like people come off after a while and they're just like, you know what, I got to take a break from this because it can be too much. So, thanks.
Thank you,
Yeah, I
Janet.
think that's also such an important thing in terms of setting group norms and expectations. And that's often something that is done at the beginning of every group, just to remind everybody that many people may still be kind of living with some trauma and can be easily triggered, and to keep that in mind when sharing and how much to share. And I'll say the next thing with the qualifier that I know it can be very difficult to access individual mental health support, but a lot of people living with pain also have depression, anxiety, and trauma. And so doing peer support alongside, it's especially with trauma, typically not a replacement for sort of more intensive therapy and support that can help kind of manage. And it's also just knowing yourself and whether you're ready for that type of unknown that can come with peer support.
Like that, just knowing yourself and knowing whether or not you're ready. That's good to know. Thank you all. So I have one comment here for you all. Well, it says specifically for Janet, that was doing your presentation. Of course, it says, I am not seeing the option for everyone, but want to share that I am in tears hearing Janet and everyone else's words. So thank you. Thank you. So next question is for Susan. I was just at the Bill, how is it said, Neelam Center on Friday for treatment for my pain and checked the box stating I am willing to participate in research when filling in their intake questionnaire. Do you have or know of anyone else that has ongoing research projects that I can participate in? Is there any research past, ongoing, or planned regarding the challenges of being neurodiverse and having to deal with chronic pain?
Thank you. Oh, in our local clinic, we did just wrap up this one study. I'm not sure of any immediate ones happening. I think actually Pain Canada does send out notifications about research opportunities that are available. So if you are on the mailing list for Pain BC or Pain Canada, that might be a way to get involved. In terms of neurodiverse populations, I know one person in England doing this, and don't know the name of him off the top of my head. It's not a big research area in adults. It is in children. And so pain communication, because pain is communicated differently, especially for those, for example, on the spectrum that are non-speaking, it can be difficult. Very little attention. I hope there will be more on neurodiversity and pain in adults. So we could talk about that I'd love to connect with you separately about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. So you heard that, Audrey. Susan would like to connect with you separately about that. There is a comment here. It says, peer support is great, just knowing I was not alone. But when I turned 65, the government closed so many doors. I have been on O2 for 24 years, but now they do not support. And being 65, I now rarely get out. I can't afford anymore. I have been using my retirement. Ooh. Someone says, Sean, I believe validation is huge. Yeah, our next question. This is a long one, so I'm not exactly sure if it's a question or a comment or both, but it's from Andrew, and he says, living with pain can rob you of so much. It shrinks your world and significantly isolates you. Comments. If you are used to being independent, you become dependent upon others, and that can drive you nuts to be asking for help all the time. Ooh, we relate. I was by nature not a joiner. As Groucho Marx said, I would never be part of a group that would have me as a member. I grew up with a view that real men suck it up and talk it out. Be a man. Ay, ay, ay. And then came COVID, and that increased the sense of isolation 100-fold. So I joined a wellness group with some hesitation and reservations about how effective it would be. What did I find? Leaders with skill in introducing many topics of meaning to us, a group of people with similar experiences and challenges. I found out that I wasn't alone. Awesome. That was a beautiful comment, by the way. And there is a question here from Jenny. Susan, you mentioned time being a barrier and also perceived time, which makes me think of the barriers we ourselves can place between. We can be caught in a spiral of thinking. Can you please elaborate? Do you want me to read that over again?
No, that's great. Yeah, thank you, Jenny. That's there's a lot to unpack with that. I think I mean, there is the concrete barrier of time, and I see that somebody else commented just even asking, could we have more shorter peer support sessions? And so I think, again, different formats. 2 hours is objectively perhaps too long for some people if they are balancing work and caregiving demands and so on. That is a good chunk of time that not everybody does have realistically. So looking at different formats where you still get the benefit of facilitation, because I think that is such a big part of it. And part of why Facebook groups for pain and so on can sometimes have mixed experiences, because it lacks the moderation, even though you can access it any time of the day for as much time as you want. But when it comes to the barriers that we place on ourselves, yeah, I mean, these are free groups. They're there and waiting, but there are so many ways we can get in our own way. And some of that is, I mean, the pandemic has come up a couple of times here. I think some people, many people are still finding their way out of that and finding a new normal. And it can be very intimidating to be in a group of people that you don't know and you've never met and seem, you know, that are strangers. And so it is taking that first step towards self-care. And maybe it isn't a peer support group, but I think it is part of a package of taking care of yourself, and that can feed a real positive cycle. So the more you start doing for yourself and feeling the improvement that, and remembering that you are worth it. Maybe it's not a peer with pain, but maybe it's just a family member or friend that can even bug you. Have you signed up for that peer support group yet? Some kind of accountability, or have you gone out for that, 5-minute walk you said you were going to do, or just get some sun on your face? Maybe not as much likely this time of year, but small steps, right? I think breaking it down into small manageable steps is a really big key. What's realistic for you? And if you know right off the bat, 2-hour peer support, not realistic, that's okay. Let's pare it back and see what does seem to be manageable and in line with your values and what's important for your own time, where you want to spend your time. Because you can meet peers. I mean, pain is so common. You could join a gardening group and meet somebody with pain. It doesn't have to be this, right?
Oh, thank you, Susan. Oh my goodness. Just so you know, we still have a lot of questions and comments, but I'm not sure we have enough time for all the questions. But there is a question here from Zana, and she, can we have flexible hour sessions? Perhaps only hour sessions, but the facilitator can stay on for longer if some people need to stay and talk more. I know with my peer support groups, we do that sometimes. So if you need to stay for a bit, after everyone else is gone, yeah, we can accommodate that. Another question from Marie. Is there a general listing of different peer support groups for chronic pain?
I think Pain BC is working on this right now. The Power Over Pain portal, I believe, has a list of peer support that's maybe not specific to BC. I know we have been speaking a lot about Pain BC this afternoon. But there are People in Pain Network. There are other networks out there that do offer support groups.
Thank you, Susan. There is a question here, and I'm really interested in this question. And I'm sure Paul and Janet will have a lot to say. What benefits do peer support facilitators get from being involved? How has it changed their lives?
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. Well, we're facilitators because also, our lived experience with pain. So very quickly, I realized that it wasn't like a top-down approach. We're not running the group. We're not in charge of the group.
Yep.
Very quickly, I was like, we are part of the group. We are the group. And facilitator just meant that, we were trained a little bit in facilitating, and yeah, I mean, we're going to group as well, and we're getting help with our pain, but maybe as facilitators, if we have a bird's eye view of the group, just like Susan mentioned, you can enter a gardening group and meet someone with pain. Just seeing the variety of people that come in groups just your empathy grows. You see people outside and you don't know who's going through what, and that kindness and empathy you can provide to everyone in your group, no matter where they're from, who they are, the different story. Pain doesn't care if you're a mother, an athlete, a doctor, or a student. Pain can hit you. And so for me, it was just, I mean, I knew pain was real. I knew people went through pain, but I think what it just showed me was that it's indiscriminate. It could be anyone at any time, and maybe made me kinder, more empathetic, and then just helped me have these conversations in private a better. Maybe some of the training to be a facilitator and some of the educational materials has helped me with one-on-one conversations with friends and coworkers. And kind of, Shannon, have you felt that as well?
Mhm. Definitely communication has really that has been a big impact for me as far as my involvement with peer support and pain. You you see different things, you experience different things, and pain is one of those ones that man, when it bites, it bites, and as you say, it does not discriminate against anyone. It'll just, you see little kids. I remember I had a baby who was born who was very sick, and we were in the London sick kids for 2 months. And so we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House, and I'll always remember this one little boy, and he was there for chemotherapy. And at the McDonald House, and he had had his treatment, and he's there, and he's just running around in circles. And every once in a while, he'd stop and he'd run in the bathroom and he'd throw up, and then he'd come out and run and run again. And I just think, like, oh my God, like the resilience of this little boy, and like he wasn't letting anything stop him at all. And I think that's part of it, is like we have to keep going. And it is much as we give, we receive too. Like it's a two-way thing, it's a multi-way thing. And we can feed on it as others feed on it. And it makes such a big difference.
Oh, thank you all so, so very much. I I enjoyed being here today, and I'm really thankful for everyone who was here. I have this last comment for us all. This would be a great way for us to end our session. And it says, thank you all for this presentation. Even just listening to you all today has been an amazing experience. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia in December of 2023, but symptoms started in 2021. I have been lucky when it comes to doctors who have listened and helped. I agree with what others were saying, feeling like you have lost everything. I had to walk away from my job because I couldn't get out of bed. I'm a military spouse and we move around a lot, and I have found that the best support I've had in a long time. But thank you for this presentation. I am going to look for support groups where I live. I have joined the Winnipeg Fibromyalgia Support Group, and they are amazing. Thank you all so very much. We are sorry we couldn't take all questions today, but we hope we can follow up on them later today. So now I'm going to hand the virtual mic back to Prachi to move us into our next segment of the day. Thank you.